The notice on the door. The morning sun stretched lazily across the quiet suburban neighborhood, spilling gold over tidy lawns and pastel-painted fences. It was the kind of place where life looked peaceful from the outside. Every hedge trimmed, every driveway swept, every mailbox standing straight as if saluting the perfection of its surroundings. Yet beneath that glossy surface, something less harmonious was brewing, something that would shake the calm facade to its roots. Karen had always been the kind of woman who liked things just so. She woke before dawn, counted the steps on her treadmill, and planned her day in neat columns on a color-coded calendar. To her, order was not simply a preference, it was a philosophy. Anything that threatened it had to be corrected, removed, or if necessary, replaced entirely. When she'd first moved into the neighborhood 3 years ago, she saw potential for growth, prestige, and maybe even leadership. The homeowners association was small but influential, and Karen made sure she was noticed. She spearheaded cleanup drives, demanded uniform fencing, and imposed parking regulations that made her name both respected and feared. In her mind, she was building something beautiful, something ideal. But not everyone fit into her vision. At the far edge of the street, past the neat rows of manicured houses, there stood an odd property. A wide stretch of land with an aging, weather-beaten cabin nestled beneath a cluster of oak trees. The grass grew tall, wildflowers tangled along the fence, and in springtime dandelions drifted through the air like lazy snowflakes. It was a quiet, almost forgotten place, and it belonged to an old man named Samuel. Karen had never spoken to Samuel directly. Most people hadn't. He was a relic of the town's past, a man who kept to himself and seemed content to live simply, almost stubbornly, on that piece of earth. Every now and then, people saw him walking with a wooden cane, collecting mail from his rusted box, or tending to a small vegetable patch behind the cabin. He rarely waved, rarely smiled, but there was something in his stillness, a dignity that made him seem immovable, timeless. To Karen, however, Samuel's land was an eyesore. It was unkept, outdated, dragging down the property values, as she would say in meetings. She'd received enough complaints, or perhaps created enough of them herself, to justify action. And when she discovered, through a hasty search of property records, that there were irregularities in the zoning documents, her resolve hardened. That morning she printed the eviction notice herself. The paper was crisp, her tone authoritative, and her reasoning airtight, or so she believed. The property, she wrote, was in violation of several local ordinances. It needed to be vacated within 30 days pending official review. She tucked the folded document into a bright yellow envelope, signed her name in bold black ink, and marched down the street toward Samuel's cabin with a sense of righteous purpose. The air changed as she approached the edge of the property. The suburban hum quieted. The oak branches stretched overhead like guardians of a forgotten time, their leaves whispering secrets in the breeze. The cabin's wooden walls bore scars of age, deep cracks, faded paint, and the faint scent of pine. She wrinkled her nose, hesitated for a moment, then forced herself forward and taped the notice to the front door with a firm press. For a moment she stood there, staring at the paper fluttering slightly against the old wood. She imagined the scene that would follow, the old man reading it, packing his things quietly, moving away without resistance. The land would finally be cleaned up. Perhaps the HOA could buy it and build a park, or maybe a new modern home. Something proper, something that fit. But as she turned to leave, she noticed something strange. At the edge of the property, half buried in the soil near a weathered fence post, was a metal sign. She brushed away the dirt with the toe of her shoe. The letters were nearly invisible under the rust, but she could just make out the engraving. Private land, established 1947. Karen frowned. That was decades before most of the neighborhood even existed. She brushed it off as irrelevant. Old signs meant nothing, she told herself. Things changed. Progress demanded it. Later that evening, as the sun melted behind the tree line, Samuel noticed the envelope. His hands trembled slightly as he peeled it from the door and read the words. His eyes lingered not on the demand itself but on the name at the bottom. Karen Miller, HOA President. A soft, almost amused sigh escaped his lips. He folded the paper carefully, walked inside, and placed it on a wooden desk beneath a framed photograph. The picture was old, its edges curling, a black and white image of a young man standing on the same land, shovel in hand, smiling beside a small "sold" sign staked into the ground. That young man had been Samuel, and the land beneath his feet was more than just soil and grass. It was his family's legacy, written into the very foundation of the town. The following morning, Karen woke to a string of messages. Word had spread quickly. Some neighbors were supportive, praising her for taking initiative. Others were cautious, even disapproving. They spoke of Samuel with quiet respect, reminding her that he had lived there long before most of them were even born. Karen dismissed it as sentimentality. Rules were rules, she insisted. But when she arrived at the next HOA meeting, she found an envelope waiting for her at the front desk. No postage, no name, only her own written neatly across the front. Inside was a single piece of paper, a copy of an old land deed dated 78 years ago. The name on it read Samuel Whitaker, followed by a line that made her heart skip. Owner in perpetuity, as granted by the original township. Karen blinked, confusion washing over her confidence. That couldn't be right. Property rights didn't last forever, and yet the document looked authentic, embossed with a seal, notarized in the handwriting of an era long past. She tucked it into her folder, forcing a smile as she led the meeting. But her voice wavered ever so slightly when she spoke, her mind elsewhere, spinning with questions she didn't yet have answers for. As the meeting adjourned, the autumn wind began to stir outside. The oak trees at the edge of town swayed gently, as if whispering reminders of promises made long ago. Karen stood by the window staring toward the direction of Samuel's land, feeling, for the first time, a faint unease in the order she'd so carefully built. Something about this wasn't as simple as she'd thought, and the old man she'd tried to push aside might not be as powerless as he seemed. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the neighborhood, Karen closed her planner with a sharp snap. Her reflection in the glass looked composed, but beneath that polished calm, something restless had begun to stir. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would get to the bottom of it. She had no idea how deep the roots of that land truly went.